The scream tore through the silence of the office corridor, sharp and sudden, like glass shattering against stone. Amelia's heart pounded as her name echoed in the air, shouted not in fear, but in accusation. She froze, papers slipping from her trembling hands, scattering like broken feathers across the cold tile floor. The fluorescent lights hummed above, buzzing in sync with her rising panic. Her colleague, Martin, stepped into view, his voice sharp, accusing her of betrayal she did not commit. Amelia whispered, "This isn't true," but the words barely left her lips, swallowed by the crushing silence around them. The sound of laughter from a distant corner cut into her chest, as if the world had decided to mock her pain. She felt the weight of eyes unseen, heavy, judging, pressing her into the ground. In that moment, every quiet sacrifice, every swallowed word, every hidden strength seemed meaningless. Shame burned her cheeks, fear tightened her chest, but beneath it all, something ancient stirred, an ember, a defiance she had never dared let breathe until now. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavier than the accusation itself. Amelia gathered the scattered pages, each one a reminder of her fragility exposed before those who waited for her to fail. She forced her trembling hands to steady, her breath shallow as if the very air resisted her lungs. Martin's words lingered, sharp and poisonous, echoing inside her head until they blurred with her own doubts. She thought of the countless times she had chosen silence, believing it was safer than the truth. "Why do I always let them break me?" she whispered under her breath. She remembered the quiet years, blending into the background, unseen, unheard, unnoticed. The walls of the corridor seemed to close in, their sterile whiteness reflecting her loneliness. Yet, beneath her fear, a fragile seed of anger sprouted, not against Martin alone, but against the years that had stolen her courage. In her silence, she began to sense a faint whisper, not of defeat, but of defiance waiting to be born. Amelia walked home that night under the streetlights, each step echoing her thoughts. The city hummed with indifference, cars rushing past, strangers' faces blurred by neon glow, all blind to her private war. She remembered being a little girl, sitting quietly at the dinner table, her words drowned beneath louder voices, her silence mistaken for obedience. The habit of disappearing had clung to her, even as she grew, until she forgot what her own voice sounded like. She whispered, "Maybe this is who I am," but the taste of the words felt bitter, untrue. She recalled the colleague who once told her she was stronger than she believed, words she had laughed off, though they haunted her now. She felt the weight of her past pressing down, yet something inside her resisted, a spark refusing to die. The night air chilled her skin, but in her chest, the ember of defiance glowed faintly brighter. The next morning, Amelia stood before the mirror, her reflection pale and hollow, the weight of sleepless hours clinging beneath her eyes. She touched her face, as though to remind herself she was still here, still real, not just the shadow others saw. She straightened her blazer, forced her lips into something resembling a smile, but it faltered quickly. "Today will be different," she whispered, though doubt coiled tightly around her chest. At work, voices swirled in the air, hushed conversations pausing when she entered, eyes following her like silent accusation. Each step felt like walking through glass shards, fragile but cutting. Martin glanced at her, his stare cool and dismissive, as though nothing had happened, as though she were invisible again. Her silence screamed louder than her words, yet inside something pressed harder against the walls of her restraint, demanding release. Amelia sat at her desk, her hands hovering over the keyboard, staring at the blank screen as if it mirrored her life. Around her the office buzzed with chatter, but she felt like a ghost drifting among the living. She recalled the years of effort, the late nights, the sacrifices, all dismissed as though she were nothing more than a shadow. Martin's accusation replayed in her mind, feeding the ache of injustice. She whispered, "I can't let this be the end," though her voice trembled, betraying her uncertainty. A colleague walked past, offering her a brief knowing glance but saying nothing. The weight of unspoken truths pressed on Amelia's chest, yet she felt the ember inside flare once more. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. For the first time, she realized silence would no longer protect her. It would bury her. And she was not ready to be buried. The office buzzed with quiet murmurs, but Amelia felt the weight of silence pressing more than the whispers. Martin's glare was a constant reminder of words never spoken in her defense. She walked through the aisles, each step heavy, as if the floor resented her presence. Conversations ended when she passed, replaced with sharp glances, unspoken judgments written in every eye. She thought, "They want me broken, invisible again." Yet she forced her back straight, her chin raised, though her stomach knotted with fear. A co-worker dropped a file, papers scattering, and Amelia bent instinctively to help, but her hand was brushed aside with a cold smile. The rejection stung, sharper than words, another reminder of her isolation. She whispered to herself, "Why do I still hope for kindness?" The quiet cruelty around her painted her solitude brighter, pressing against her chest until her breath wavered. Still, she walked forward, her silence daring to hold the fragments of dignity. Later, in the break room, Amelia poured herself coffee. Her hands steady, but her reflection in the glass carafe betrayed her trembling resolve. Martin entered, his presence filling the room with silent accusation. He smirked, not with words but with a look sharp enough to slice through her. She tightened her grip on the cup, forcing her voice to steady as she whispered, "This isn't over." Yet he only turned, dismissing her as if she were air. Behind him, Rachel, a co-worker with quick sarcasm and a cynical grin, leaned against the counter, arms crossed. She watched Amelia quietly, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "You're letting him win," Rachel finally said, her voice blunt, cutting into Amelia's silence. Amelia winced, unsure whether the words were attack or lifeline. She wanted to argue, to defend her stillness, but the truth in Rachel's eyes burned. The silence stretched, heavy, until Amelia realized it was not her enemy, it was her cage. That night Amelia sat at her kitchen table, her apartment dim except for the glow of a single lamp. Bills lay scattered, reminders of burdens that never faded. She thought of her mother's words, harsh and unrelenting, "You'll never survive if you don't learn to keep quiet." Those lessons had carved deep into her bones, shaping her silence into armor. But now that same silence suffocated her, a prison built from years of obedience. Her reflection in the darkened window stared back, unfamiliar, like a stranger living her life. "Is this what they made me?" she whispered, her voice hoarse with grief. Memories rose of classmates laughing, of supervisors overlooking her, of family doubting her worth. Each memory felt like a stone pressing on her chest, heavier with every breath. Yet within the despair, her anger sparked again, a small flame daring to burn against the weight of history. She clenched her fist on the table, refusing to extinguish it. The next day unfolded like a cruel play, each act designed to push Amelia further into the shadows. In the meeting room, Martin's voice dominated, his words smooth, each glance toward her laced with veiled contempt. Amelia sat stiff, her hands folded tightly in her lap, every instinct urging her to remain silent. Around her, colleagues nodded at his every word, their agreement another nail in the coffin of her confidence. She wanted to speak, to correct his lies, but the weight of years chained her tongue. "They won't listen," she thought, her throat dry, her heart aching with the effort of restraint. Rachel sat across the table, her eyes locked on Amelia, unflinching. She raised a brow, a silent challenge, daring Amelia to rise. The air grew heavy, the walls closing in, the moment swelling like a storm waiting to break. Amelia's silence screamed within her, louder than words, demanding to be shattered. By evening, Amelia lingered in the empty office, the glow of her computer screen casting shadows across her tired face. She stared at the blinking cursor, its rhythm mocking her hesitation. She thought of Martin's smirk, of Rachel's blunt words, of the silence she had carried for decades. "This isn't who I am," she murmured, the words trembling but real. Her reflection in the dark screen was not the weak shadow she once believed, but a woman balancing on the edge of change. Fear still coiled within her, but now it wrestled with something stronger, a hunger for truth, for her voice. She placed her hands firmly on the keyboard, the decision trembling at her fingertips. Around her the office was silent, not oppressive this time but waiting, holding its breath. For the first time she did not feel entirely alone. The ember inside her glowed, fragile but undeniable, and she refused to let it die. The conference room air felt sharp, heavy with unspoken tension as Amelia sat across from Martin. He leaned forward, his voice cold, dismissing her work as insignificant. Every word was a dagger, meant to strip away what little resolve she had gathered. Amelia felt her pulse racing, her throat tightening, but she forced her shoulders back. She had spent years bowing her head, swallowing truths, but this moment pressed her against the edge of silence. Martin smirked, confident in her retreat, but Amelia's eyes lifted, steady and unyielding. "This isn't yours to take from me," she whispered, her voice shaking but real. The room grew still, her colleagues exchanging uneasy glances, unsure whether to watch or turn away. Her heart thundered, fear clawing inside her chest, yet in defiance she stayed, refusing to crumble. For the first time silence did not own her, it trembled under her voice. Rachel caught up with Amelia in the hallway, her arms folded, eyes sharp, voice cutting straight through the fragile silence. "You're finally waking up," she said, her tone half mocking, half approving. Amelia winced, her mind replaying the confrontation, her chest still burning with adrenaline. "I wasn't strong," she muttered, but Rachel shook her head. "Strength isn't about being fearless. It's about standing while your fear screams at you." The bluntness stung, but Amelia felt something shift, like a locked door creaking open. For years, she had believed her silence was safety, but Rachel's words revealed it as chains. She whispered, "What if I fail?" Rachel smirked faintly, her voice low. "Then at least you finally fought." The words settled deep, echoing louder than doubt. Amelia realized she had found something she never expected, an ally who would never coddle her, but would force her forward. That evening, Amelia walked the quiet streets, neon signs flickering against the wet pavement. Memories rose unbidden, classmates laughing at her silence, teachers praising others while overlooking her raised hand, family dismissing her words before they left her lips. She felt the echoes pressing hard against her chest, every memory another weight binding her voice. Yet she also remembered moments when she had stood alone, even if no one noticed, moments when she had survived. She whispered, "I've been fighting all my life," and the truth surprised her. It was not weakness that defined her silence but survival. Now, survival was no longer enough. A cold wind brushed her cheeks, and she clenched her fists, the city lights reflecting in her eyes like small flames. The past had silenced her, but the present demanded more. She was not a shadow. She was someone rising. The next morning, Amelia returned to work with her chest heavy, but her steps steady. She entered the office and found Martin leaning against her desk, rifling through her documents with casual arrogance. He looked up, smirk curling across his lips, daring her to challenge him. For a moment her breath caught, the familiar pull of silence wrapping tight around her throat. But then she remembered Rachel's words, remembered the years of swallowed truths, and something inside her shifted. "Those are mine," Amelia said firmly, her voice sharper than she expected. Martin froze, surprise flickering in his eyes, before he disguised it with mockery. Yet Amelia stood her ground, her gaze steady, refusing to shrink. Around them a few colleagues watched in quiet astonishment, sensing the shift but unsure of its weight. For Amelia, it was not victory yet, but it was the first strike of her rebellion. By evening, Amelia sat again at her desk, but the air around her no longer felt suffocating. She replayed the confrontation, the way her voice had cut through the silence, fragile yet undeniable. Fear still coiled within her, but it no longer ruled her. She whispered, "I can fight," the words foreign yet powerful on her tongue. Rachel passed by, offering only a brief nod, but it was enough. Acknowledgement without pity, respect without softness. Amelia's hands hovered above her keyboard, but this time the hesitation did not chain her. She began to type, each word striking like a hammer, her story finally clawing free from the cage of silence. Outside the window, the city lights glimmered against the night, indifferent yet unyielding. For the first time, Amelia did not feel like a shadow. She felt like a woman taking her place in the world, no matter the cost. The office felt like a cage as Amelia stood cornered by Martin's words, his voice echoing across the room with venom disguised as charm. He accused her of incompetence, of mistakes she never made, each sentence crafted to break her spirit in front of their colleagues. Her chest tightened, memories of past humiliations colliding with the present, fear clawing to silence her once more. But in her silence, her anger burned hotter, pressing against her ribs, demanding release. Rachel sat across the room, her eyes sharp, unflinching, as if to remind Amelia that retreat was no longer an option. "You think you can silence me," Amelia said quietly, her voice trembling yet audible, and the room froze. Martin blinked, caught off guard, his smirk faltering before he disguised it again. Amelia's heart pounded so hard it hurt, but she stood firm, refusing to collapse under the weight of years that had pressed her down. The betrayal struck deeper than she expected. A colleague she had trusted, who once shared coffee and quiet conversations, now nodded along with Martin's accusations, their silence complicit. Amelia's chest hollowed, the sting of betrayal cutting sharper than Martin's venom. She swallowed hard, her throat aching with words unsaid. For years she had believed loyalty existed in small gestures, yet now she saw the truth. It was fragile, conditional, fleeting. "I thought you saw me," she whispered under her breath, though no one heard. Rachel's gaze met hers briefly, a flicker of understanding, but she did not move to comfort. Amelia realized that this was her fight, her test, and no one would carry her through it. The sting of abandonment bled into her anger, strengthening her resolve rather than destroying it. She understood then, trust could be broken, but her will could not. The tension spilled into the hallway afterward, voices low yet sharp, whispers chasing Amelia as she passed. Every step echoed like judgment, the walls pressing closer, her lungs burning with the effort of holding back tears. She wanted to scream, to shatter the sterile quiet with the storm inside her, but instead her jaw locked, her silence strangling. She thought of all the years she had obeyed, all the times she chose to fade, believing it would protect her. Yet what had silence brought her but ridicule and chains? Her fists tightened at her sides, nails biting into her palms. "No more," she mouthed to herself, a vow she refused to break. Her reflection in the glass walls stared back at her, no longer hollow but filled with fire. The whispers could not define her anymore. She was done bowing. That night, Amelia lay awake staring at the ceiling, her body rigid with exhaustion, but her mind replayed the day like a relentless storm. The betrayal, the humiliation, the sting of her silence, it all circled her, pressing heavily on her chest. She felt the ache of hopelessness rising, pulling her deeper into shadows that once felt safe but now threatened to consume her. She whispered into the darkness, "I'm tired of being invisible." Her own words startled her, the sound fragile but defiant. She rolled to her side, gripping the blanket tightly, her breath shallow, eyes burning. For the first time she realized the silence had not protected her, it had destroyed her. Tears fell quietly, but each one felt like release, like weight peeling away. In the quiet of her small apartment, Amelia made a promise to herself. She would not let despair define her. The next morning, Rachel found Amelia at her desk, her eyes swollen but her posture straight, her silence heavier but sharper. Rachel leaned against the edge of the desk, her voice blunt as always. "You can either stay broken, or you can stand up." Amelia's lips parted but no words came. Her chest still carried the scars of the night before, but something within her had shifted. The fire that had sparked in whispers was now smoldering steadily, waiting for air. "I don't know how," she admitted finally, her voice hoarse but raw. Rachel gave a half smile, shaking her head. "No one does. You just do it anyway." Amelia's eyes locked on hers, the truth of the words cutting deep. For the first time she felt less alone, even if the battle was still hers. The path was uncertain, but she was ready to begin walking. Amelia returned to the office library, a quiet space lined with records and files rarely touched. She sifted through documents, searching for answers, and there it was, a buried report contradicting Martin's accusations. Her chest tightened as realization dawned. The truth had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. Her fingers trembled as she held the file, anger mingling with relief. She whispered, "He lied," her voice low but fierce. The silence around her no longer mocked. It protected her discovery. She thought of the years she had believed others' versions of her, their lies shaping her identity. But here in her hands was proof that she was not the failure they painted. For the first time her silence was not weakness but strategy, her patience giving her power. She clutched the file like a weapon ready to wield truth against the shadows. She carried the file to Rachel, her voice unsteady but determined as she explained. Rachel flipped through the pages, her cynical smirk fading into something sharper, approval masked in her blunt tone. "So, you finally found your teeth," she said. Amelia exhaled, her chest lighter yet burning with adrenaline. She realized that proof alone wasn't enough. Courage was needed to use it. "What if they don't listen?" she asked. Rachel's gaze held steady, her voice calm. "They don't need to listen, you just need to speak." The words rang inside Amelia, a challenge and a call. For so long, silence had been her shield, but now it was her chains. Holding the file, she knew this was her moment of choice. The truth was her weapon, but her voice would decide the battle. That evening, Amelia sat by her window, the city's glow stretching endlessly beneath her. She thought of the countless nights she had sat in this same spot, suffocated by doubt, staring at reflections that felt like strangers. Tonight was different. The file lay open beside her, its truths undeniable, its weight heavy with possibility. Her chest ached with fear, but her mind burned with clarity. "It's time," she whispered, the words steady, no longer fragile. She realized that silence had not been survival, it had been surrender. And she was done surrendering. The city lights blurred into fire in her eyes, her heart beating with defiance. She knew the risks, the backlash, the loneliness waiting on the other side, but she no longer cared. This was the moment her silence shattered, the first true step into her own light. The next day, Amelia entered the office with the file clutched in her hands. Every step toward the meeting room felt like marching into battle. Martin stood at the head of the table, his confident smile flashing, certain of his control. Amelia placed the file before him, her eyes steady, her voice sharp. "This proves your lies." The room fell silent, colleagues shifting uncomfortably, eyes darting between them. Martin's smirk faltered, his hand tightening on the edge of the table. Amelia felt her pulse racing, fear coiling, but she pushed forward, her words sharp as steel. For years silence had made her invisible. Now her voice made her undeniable. Each sentence struck like a blow, peeling away his false authority. She stood taller, her presence filling the room, no longer a shadow but a force demanding to be seen. By evening, Amelia left the building, her heart still thundering, but her body lighter than it had ever felt. The confrontation replayed in her mind, not as humiliation, but as triumph. She had spoken, she had fought, and she had refused to fade. The world outside felt the same, cars honking, people rushing, but she felt utterly changed. She whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore," the words carrying into the cool night air. For years, silence had defined her existence. Tonight, her voice redefined her. Rachel's words, Martin's lies, her own fears, all collided into a single truth. She was no longer invisible. The night stretched before her, filled with uncertainty, but also possibility. For the first time, Amelia embraced it, not with dread, but with courage. The ember inside her had ignited fully, and it burned bright enough to guide her forward. The night before the confrontation, Amelia sat at her desk, the city lights outside painting the window with fractured gold. Her heart raced, her mind replaying every humiliation, every silence she had endured. Fear wrapped around her chest, but beneath it was a steady rhythm of determination. She whispered, "This ends tomorrow," her voice calm, steady, unshaken. She prepared her notes, not as weapons of logic alone, but as proof of her truth. For years she had hidden, hoping invisibility might keep her safe, but now she realized it had only chained her. She felt the weight of what tomorrow meant, her identity, her dignity, her future. Yet as she looked at her reflection in the glass, she saw not the woman who once cowered in silence but one ready to step into fire. Morning came heavy with anticipation. Amelia entered the office, her footsteps deliberate, her shoulders squared. Rachel stood by the hallway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable, but her nod subtle, enough to remind Amelia she was not alone. Martin watched her from the far end, his smirk sharp, dismissive, as though victory was already his. Amelia felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her gaze locked, refusing to falter. He will not own this day, she thought. She knew Rachel's presence would not shield her, but it steadied her, a silent reminder that strength was not built in isolation. As Amelia reached the meeting room, she inhaled deeply, fear and courage tangled in equal measure. The moment had come, and there was no retreat. The meeting room buzzed with low murmurs as Amelia placed her file firmly on the table. Martin leaned back in his chair, his arrogance filling the air like smoke, but Amelia no longer shrank beneath it. She opened the file, her voice steady as she revealed the truth he had hidden. Gasps filled the room as evidence unfolded, page after page unraveling his lies. Martin's composure faltered, his jaw tightening, his smirk disappearing. Amelia felt her fear burn away, replaced by clarity, strength pulsing through every word. For years she had been invisible, but now every eye was locked on her. "You can't silence me anymore," she declared. The words rang sharp, final, cutting through the heavy air. Martin stood abruptly, anger breaking through his calm facade, his voice sharp as he attempted to regain control. But Amelia did not flinch. She stepped forward, her words cutting his denial apart, every phrase rooted in truth he could not escape. The room's silence grew heavy, not with fear, but with the shift of power. Amelia's heart pounded, but she refused to back down. "You will not bury me," she said, her voice steady, unbroken. For a moment, Martin faltered, his mask crumbling. The colleagues who once whispered now leaned forward, their eyes fixed not on him but on her. Amelia felt her chest expand, her voice no longer a whisper, but a force shaking the walls of her prison. She had faced her deepest fear, and she had not shattered. The confrontation ended not with applause but with silence, a silence that no longer suffocated but reverberated with power. Amelia stood in the center, her breath ragged but her body unshaken. Martin slumped back into his chair, his authority fractured, his lies exposed. Rachel's eyes met hers, not with sympathy, but with respect. Amelia realized she had not just survived, she had won. Her voice had shattered the cage that had bound her for decades. The battle had drained her, but she felt alive, more real than she had ever been. She whispered to herself, "I am no longer afraid," the words carrying not as hope but as truth. The aftermath carried an unusual quiet. Amelia returned to her desk, her colleagues' eyes following with newfound awareness. Some whispered, others stared, but she no longer felt crushed beneath their judgment. She sat calmly, her hands resting on the desk, her chest still heavy with adrenaline but lighter than ever before. She had faced the storm and was still standing. She realized victory was not loud. It was steady, quiet, undeniable. In her silence now, there was no weakness. There was strength. Later, Amelia walked through the city streets, the air crisp, the sky painted with the soft hues of dusk. People rushed past her, strangers lost in their own worlds, but she felt unshakably grounded. For the first time in years, her silence did not isolate. It connected her, made her part of the living current. She touched the strap of her bag and smiled faintly, her lips trembling with release. She whispered, "I'm not invisible anymore." The words felt like a vow written into the air itself. At home, Amelia placed the file on her kitchen table and stared at it, her reflection mirrored faintly in the glossy cover. She no longer needed it as proof for herself, only as a reminder of what she had overcome. She touched the pages gently, then closed it with finality. She whispered, "This is no longer my cage." Her voice carried softly into the stillness, but the stillness felt peaceful now, not suffocating. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply, her chest lighter than it had been in years. The following morning, Amelia stood before her mirror again, but the reflection that stared back was no longer a stranger. Her eyes carried fire, her posture tall, her lips set in quiet determination. She had been broken, she had been invisible, but now she was neither. She adjusted her blazer, smoothing the fabric as if sealing her new self into place. "This is who I am," she said softly, her voice not trembling but firm. For the first time, she believed it. The story closed not with noise but with a single moment. Amelia walked outside into the morning air, the world buzzing with life around her. She paused, lifted her face to the sky, and breathed deeply. "I am free," she said, the words soft but powerful, carrying into the wind. They did not echo. They lingered. Her silence had been her prison, but now her voice was her freedom. The world stretched wide and endless before her, and she stepped into it unafraid.